How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
My fellow Americans, welcome. It's Eric Erickson across the United States, coming to you live from Kiowa Island for the second day. I'll be back in my studio tomorrow here in the hotel. One more day, the sanctuary at Kiowa. Been here for this conference. Played golf yesterday. May hit a few this afternoon, but I got to go to the airport. They changed my flight because of the hurricane coming. Those of you in the southeast, pay attention to your local radio stations as this storm is picking up steam and moving quickly north from Cuba, coming up through Tallahassee, it looks like, into Georgia, North Carolina, headed through then into Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana. It's going to be a mess up and down the eastern seaboard by the weekend. The phone number, 877-973-7425, if you want to be on real quick. Orrin Routh is the progressive activist son of the Trump would-be assassin. He has been arrested in North Carolina on federal child sex crimes charges. They found child sexual abuse materials in his possession while investigating his father. Another life Donald Trump ruined. Oh, my gosh. So your dad decides to try to assassinate Donald Trump, and you're a perv with child sexual abuse materials in your data. And because of your dad becoming notorious, you get arrested. My goodness, what a horrible family. Good grief. What a completely awful family situation. The father and the son. Both carted off to prison, and the son only because the father got caught. Good grief. What a mess. That's not what I want to talk about, though. That's not what I want to talk about. There is a survey out, the Social Pressure Index. And the Social Pressure Index is a opinion research study that surveys Americans' real views on things, in large part because there is a belief, and you and I both know it's real, that increasingly Americans are avoiding saying things they believe because they're afraid they might get punished. 61% of Americans report that they've avoided saying things that they believe because others might find them offensive. This includes a majority of all demographic groups, regardless of race, gender, age, income, or political affiliation. Gen Z has the highest rate of self-silencing of any group, 72%. They're notorious. My kid was telling me in college the other day, a girl got embarrassed in class by the professor for using a female pronoun to refer to a female who uses they, them pronouns. And the girl, of course, from her background, had never encountered a they, them before and did not know how to address the person. And instead of offering grace to the girl, that they basically frog marched her down to the front of the classroom to lecture her. Gen Z is deeply concerned about these things. And what's so noticeable is how there is an erosion of trust in society. And also, on a lot of these cultural issues, Americans actually are not down with progressives. A majority of Americans believe most people cannot share their honest opinions on sensitive subjects. 61% of Americans self-silence. Across demographic groups, college graduates and political independents self-silence the most often, with double-digit gaps between public and private opinion on 37 of 64 issues. Even though a sizable minority of Americans, 37%, publicly express a belief that we live in a mostly fair society, only 7% privately agree. a 30-point difference. For 2/3 of the sensitive issues studied, ranging from abortion rights and school choice to legal immigration and voter ID requirements, 90% of demographic groups are privately on the same side of the issue. A majority of men and women are on the same side of 57 of the 64 sensitive issues. Gen Z is notably similar to the rest of America when it comes to their private views on sensitive topics. A majority of Gen Z are on the same side of 57 of 64 sensitive topics, differing only in the magnitude of their support. The issues where they diverge from the rest of the public are climate change and immigration. Public opinion results suggest low confidence in the Supreme Court and a general distrust of government and the media. Private opinion reveals that trust is even lower than public opinion on the Supreme Court, the government, and the media. Only 7% privately trust the media. Only 4% trust the government. In private, nearly 2/3 of Americans agree more diversity would be good for the country. 64% believe legal immigrants do more to help the country than hurt it. And 58% continue to support Black Lives Matter. But Americans also want a meritocracy and privately believe the decisions about college admissions should be based on the individual's qualifications and performance. And people who self-silence have a social trust score that is 22 points lower than people who do not. In other words, people who self-censor have less trust of the public. Half of Americans' top 10 priorities for success are about a meaningful life, including being able to do work that has a positive impact on other people. The American dream is personal. It's not financial. Most Americans believe the American dream is about a personal success, but they think that most other people define it purely in economic terms. Americans overwhelmingly emphasize character over status in their view of success. It's not even close. Americans ranked every character-related attribute higher than every status-related attribute in their priorities for a successful life. Indeed, the gap is so large that even the lowest-ranking character attribute outranks the highest status attribute. College degrees are not an important part of how Americans define success. Having a bachelor's degree and having an advanced postgraduate degree are each ranked in the bottom 10 of all priorities for a successful life. And Americans care more about having children than having a spouse. Being a parent is the number 4 ranked priority, whereas being married is ranked 15. That's actually a dangerous sign for society. But there's more than that when it comes to the social pressures and the ideas. For example, 43% of people say public schools are focusing too much on racism. The vast majority of people in an age group of 30 to 44 privately think parents should have more influence over public school curriculums, but only 48% are willing to say so publicly. Second, while in public a majority say discussing gender identity in public schools is inappropriate for kids aged K through 3, in private, this isn't the majority view. Only 40% agree. Only 14% of Americans privately agree that CEOs should take such stances on wokeness, although twice as many people will say they support it publicly. It turns out, in other words, Americans are largely conservative when it comes to these woke issues, but they're kind of live and let live, but they're beginning to fester resentment that they're being bullied and browbeaten. On transgender issues, publicly, people are way more supportive than they are privately. Privately, the only group of people who supports boys and girls sports are white people who make over $150,000 a year. Nobody else supports boys and girls sports. On the issue of trans rights, not a single group in America, including white people over $150,000 a year, actually support laws that would prohibit gender discrimination against trans people. Independents and Hispanics have the greatest number of sensitive topics, with double-digit gaps between private and public opinions. In contrast, the groups that have the fewest topic gaps are Republicans and Democrats. Republicans and Democrats who are used to talking publicly about politics, they're willing to say what they think. 59% of Americans publicly agree wearing a mask was an effective way to stop COVID, but only 47% privately agree. In public, a majority of men, 60%, agree the decision to have an abortion should be left to a woman and a doctor. However, in private, it's only 45%. Most men publicly say abortion should be legal in most cases, but privately, less than half do. Think about this. There's a way forward for candidates here, and this is one of the hallmarks of Donald Trump's success, is he is willing to say publicly what a lot of Americans think privately. And what you can extrapolate from this is how Donald Trump has outperformed his polling so often, so regularly. When Donald Trump is willing to say publicly the things that most people believe privately, a lot of Americans may publicly say they don't support him, but they privately do because they believe he's the honest man in the room. And those sorts of things actually matter. And the data here from Gallup suggests that if we have more people willing to say publicly what others believe privately, those people are going to get some success. One of the things that stands out to me in this data, though, is how the character traits of people matter. Because, we do, and this isn't to poke the bear, so to speak, but, a lot of people say, well, character doesn't count anymore. You got to vote for the policy. You got to vote for these policies. And Donald Trump, for example, you may not like him. You may not like the mean tweets. You may not like his character, but it's him or Kamala Harris. And actually, what most Americans privately believe is character still counts. And that most Americans actually privately resent having to vote for people with bad character. Most Americans privately resent it. They want to be able to support someone whose character they believe in. And you don't get that in the data. You don't get that in the public conversations. And it's kind of a sad reality, I think, for all of us, to be honest, that we're in a situation where so many people do not believe they can say what they really believe. It's one reason people like me exist, but even I am in a situation where oftentimes there are those who put extraordinary pressure on me to silence the things that I even want to talk about because they don't want to alienate. You don't want to alienate people. But, I look at the data here, for example, on transgenderism and things like that. And what you actually find is that most Americans don't believe the government should protect transgender Americans against discrimination. And most Americans overwhelmingly reject the idea that sex change procedures should be available to minors. And most Americans overwhelmingly reject the idea that trans athletes should compete in the sports teams that match their current gender. Most Americans believe they should match the gender of their birth certificate. And you don't get that in the conversations in public. And those are the most censorious people. And what you find is that what we're seeing in this country, I've told you before in postmodernism, is that progressives believe they must control the conversation and censor and silence the majority in order to shift majority opinion. And you see that in this. The amount of people who privately believe things that progressives do not believe, and they're censoring themselves for fear of cancellation by progressives. Yet this gives an opening to conservative candidates in America. There should be hope for conservatives out there in this, that most Americans privately actually do agree with many of their ideas. You just need to speak about those ideas in a way that doesn't come across as a jerk, and you're going to be able to put points on the board in the culture war issues that Americans perceive. Character actually counts. And most Americans consider a person with, for example, a Christian worldview to be of better character than those who reject religion. There's a way for cultural conservatives to advance in the country. But the bottom line here is that most Americans overwhelmingly reject people who come across as jerks and bullies. If you want to advance, you got to be nice. Greetings, welcome. Glad you're with me. When we come back, I want to do kind of yesterday we had all that breaking news on Israel and Hezbollah. I want to kind of give you a broader picture of what's going on and how it's developed over time there. And then, I will get to the story. I cannot tell you how many people forwarded me Ruth Graham's story in the New York Times about the rise in young men going to church and young women not. I got a lot of thoughts on it. It's going to make some of you mad probably, but I'll get there. Right now, though, keep an eye out on the story. Dock workers on the East and Gulf Coast are threatening to strike starting October 1st. Could wreak havoc in the American economy. The Biden administration could potentially prevent a walkout, and I got to think that they're going to. They don't want to disrupt the Kamala Harris situation. A lot of shipments will be diverted to the West Coast, where dock workers there agreed to terms last year. All of these situations could cause a short strike, leading to disruptions, leading to, yet again, problems, particularly with the Christmas season coming. A lot of things for Christmas. In fact, Chris Butler, the chief executive of the National Tree Company, which sells artificial Christmas trees and Christmas decorations, said his company started routing everything through West Coast ports in anticipation of the strike, but 15% of goods could still be affected. They're not happy. It's going to affect prices and supplies. The Biden administration could potentially get involved and shut it down, which I would expect them to. And speaking of, I support funding Ukraine. I think it makes sense to help Ukraine stop the Russians. The Russians are not our friends. We made commitments to Ukraine, as did Russia. Russia broke those commitments. We should keep our word. But I resent like hell having Volodymyr Zelensky flown into the United States on the American taxpayer dime to go to Pennsylvania to thank munition workers because it is clearly an elections ploy. And you know, and I know, that if Donald Trump did something like this, the American media would express outrage over foreign interference in a federal election. The fact that the Democrats, who have been bellyaching about Russian interference in the election, are totally fine with Ukrainian interference in the election shows you just how hypocritical these people are about this. Volodymyr Zelensky should not be touring around the United States criticizing J.D. Vance. I get to criticize J.D. Vance because I'm an American. You should keep your mouth shut instead of criticizing a presidential campaign. Got that off my chest. Now I can tell you about Old Glory Bank. Old Glory Bank is my bank. They can be your bank. Old Glory Bank. Listen, y'all, in all seriousness, I have sent 2 different businesses to Old Glory Bank in the last month. Both of them are gun shops. They sell guns. And their banks, one of them a regional bank, one of them a national bank, made it very clear they were not going to continue to do business with them because they're gun stores. And it's a progressive operation to get banks to shut down gun stores as a backdoor gun control method. And Old Glory Bank exists to help companies like that. They're by conservatives for conservatives, and they're going to be able to do the banking business for these companies. They can do it for you as well, and you do not have to worry about your account getting canceled because progressives don't like you. You can go to oldglorybank.com. You can get an account set up in less than 8 minutes online. I do my banking with them. They will protect me. They'll protect you. I have no fee checking. I have a no fee savings account. I get good interest rates with the savings account and no fees. Great app, great debit card. OldGloryBank.com. OldGloryBank.com. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply. Greetings, conversationalists. Welcome. I hope you're having a great day. The phone number, 877-973-7425, should you wish to be on this program. I want to spend time now. Yesterday there was a lot of breaking news about Israel while we were doing the show, and I want to actually break some of these components down for you right now so you have a sense of what's going on and so that you can be smarter than all of your neighbors in what's happening. I'm a big proponent of making my audience as smart as possible when it comes to this. So let's talk about Israel and Lebanon. Ancient countries. You hear about, for example, Amos in the Bible was the first of the written prophets. Amos and Jonah were about around the same time. They're the first prophets. They predate, for example, like Isaiah. And Jonah, of course, is called to go to Nineveh. Amos is from Judah and is called to go up to Israel or Samaria. And Gaza, for example, is mentioned. Tyre is mentioned. these ancient cities that have been around for a very long time. Tyre is in Lebanon. Gaza, of course, is in the Gaza and the territories of Israel. Trying to be diplomatic there, of course, in how I say it. But these are ancient lands. In the 1970s, as I mentioned yesterday, Lebanon was a very cosmopolitan westernized city. It was called, Beirut was called the Paris on the Mediterranean. That's how cosmopolitan it was. Broad avenues, monuments, largely a Christian nation as well, by the way. Lebanon had a very large Christian population that was dominant in the country and its politics. And it became, over time, pluralistic, multicultural, with an influx of Muslims who were allowed in. But as Muslims began more and more going into government, it piqued Iran's interest after the 1979 revolution, and they started funding, Iran did, Islamic Shiite groups in Lebanon. And by 1982, Lebanon was descending into civil war. It was in part a religious war as Muslims were becoming dominant, and where Christians had allowed Muslims into government, Muslims were now pushing Christians out. And the whole country descended into chaos, with Iran putting its thumb on the scale in the division between the Sunni and the Shiite Muslims. And this is part of the divide here, is that the Sunni Muslims and the Christian populations were largely aligned. The Shiite Muslims and the Sunni Muslims don't like each other. The Iranians built up the Shiite armaments. A civil war starts. Iran funds the Shiite, who begin persecuting and killing the Sunni and the Christians. A lot of the Christians flee. And then when the Sunni population is put in its place, the Shiites turn their attention to the north of Israel, and there's war between Lebanon and Israel. And there becomes an agreement. There is a major river in Lebanon. It is the bulk of their agricultural water comes from the particular river. It is, what is it, the Litani River. I know I'm mispronouncing it, but it runs completely contained within Lebanon. It snows there. The springs and the water and the snow melt form the river. It goes through the Bekaa Valley. It is dammed up. It provides hydropower, and then it turns and it cuts across the country east-west. And after the war between Israel and Lebanon, there was an agreement that Hezbollah would not move arms south of the river, the Litani River. But they have been, and they've been building up closer to Tyre, and that is north of Israel. There's a mountainous region there. Israel, over time, began responding, and now they petitioned the United Nations to enforce this rule that these weapon systems are not allowed south of that river in a near demilitarized area. Israel has a fortified border, but Hezbollah doesn't care. Since the attack by Hamas on October 3rd, 2023, Hezbollah has been nonstop bombarding Israel on the north. And there are some major cities in the north of Israel. So you've got, for example, Haifa is a port city, the beautiful, beautiful ancient city of Haifa. You've got Akko. You've got a number of other areas there around the Sea of Galilee. And these northern parts of Israel, the people have had to flee down south of Nazareth for the most part. You're all, of course, familiar with Nazareth from the Bible because of the missile strikes from Hezbollah. So the Iron Dome system has been working overtime. Hezbollah is reliant on Iranian funding. Hezbollah runs Lebanon but is not technically in control of everything in Lebanon. And the Lebanese military is a very weak force that is largely funded by the French and the Americans because Lebanon used to have a distinctive French colonial presence. Hezbollah is not contained by the Lebanese military, in large part because it's such a rump of a force and operates more as a police force than anything else. Israel now is under fire from the Syrians in the north, the Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, and on occasion Iran launching ballistic missiles that fly over Iraq, Jordan, and Syria into Israel. And they've had enough. The people of Israel would like to go home to their communities in the north. And so Israel's just decided, we're going to start blowing up Hezbollah. We've infiltrated them enough. We know where everything is. What we're learning, and what the media's struggling to accurately report, is that Hezbollah has put rockets and missiles in people's homes. The only way Israel can get rid of the missiles and the rockets is to blow up the homes. If there are people at home, they're going to die. And Hezbollah and the media that hates Israel is playing up the death toll and downplaying the significance that Hezbollah, contrary to the rules of war, were storing munitions in civilian homes. Everyone likes to talk about the rules of war that apply to Israel. No one wants to talk about the rules of war that apply to Hezbollah. And one of the things they do, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did this the other day, is say, well, but they're a terrorist group. Terrorists aren't necessarily bound by the rules of war, but Israel is. And so their logic is that Israel is bound by rules of war when they fight a terrorist group that is not bound by rules of war. So the terrorist group is allowed to do things that Israel is not allowed to do. That's their logic. And Israel at this point has said, you know what, to heck with that. Now, what's also happened is, and this is something Western media has had a hard time comprehending, Benjamin Netanyahu is the longtime prime minister of Israel, and he's been in Israeli politics since I was a little boy. His brother was a famous soldier in Israel. He was raised in a famous family. He gets into politics. And Benjamin Netanyahu, after October 3rd, got a lot of blame by the Israeli population. And then that blame shifted into frustration that he was not doing enough to fight Hamas and then to fight Hezbollah. Well, my, things have changed. His Likud party's polling is going up. Benjamin Netanyahu's favorability has been rising. Why? Because of these daring attacks on Hezbollah. Turns out that the Israeli citizens, left, right, and center, were not so frustrated with Benjamin Netanyahu that they wanted him out of power. They were frustrated with him that they felt like he wasn't doing enough to fight the bad guys. So now he's fighting the bad guys. And in fighting the bad guys, his polling's gone up. And now Washington is fretting about this because the Democrats do not like Netanyahu. They don't like his administration. Joe Biden hates Benjamin Netanyahu and has been working to systematically undermine him. Benjamin Netanyahu, contrary to the mythology of Washington, D.C., is a far more cautious politician. And in fact, the people of Israel have been punishing him in the polling because of just how cautious he has become. And the last 2 weeks have shown that he's throwing caution to the wind. And in throwing caution to the wind, Netanyahu has decided to go to war. What Israel said was that they were going to blow up the pagers, blow up the CBs, the walkie-talkies, and show to Hezbollah that they were engaged and could engage, and that Hezbollah needed to stop the rocket attacks and bring peace back. Hezbollah decided, you know what, we're going to blow you up now. And as Hezbollah began launching its rockets into Israel, Israel said, oh, hey, not only were we able to map out your network of pagers and walkie-talkies, we know where all the houses are that you stored your missiles, and we're going to go blow them up now. For the last 72 hours, Israel has been blowing up buildings and homes. Yesterday, they thought they got the number 3 of Hezbollah. Hezbollah now says they didn't, although they won't offer proof of life that the number 3 in command is alive. But think about this, though. Think about this. Hezbollah is now being run by a group of people that Hezbollah did not think were competent enough to have Hezbollah pagers. It's a brutal time to be a terrorist in the Middle East because Israel has realized it's got to stay on its A game. Israel on October 6th of 2023 had gotten complacent, believing Hamas was not a terror threat anymore. And they stood down their human intelligence capabilities and human surveillance capabilities at the border wall between Gaza and Israel, and they relied on signal intelligence and electronic surveillance instead. The electronic surveillance did not detect men coming over in parachutes, couldn't detect the men coming over in parachutes, and 1,200 Israelis died. And Israel remembered the words that people uttered after the Holocaust, never again. And they've moved from their signals intelligence back to their human intelligence network. And they have been systematically decimating their enemies. Iran says it's going to respond, but Iran has been saying it's going to respond for months now and hasn't been able to respond, which also suggests that Iranian capabilities were overstated and oversold. And without Hamas and without Hezbollah as a significant threat, there's now no deterrent to Israel going after Iran's nuclear capabilities. And I suspect in a matter of weeks, we're probably going to see explosions happening in Iran as Israel decides it's time to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities. And that would be for the best for all of us to make the whole world safe from Iran at a time Iran is trying to bind itself more fully to Russia, China, and North Korea. We owe Israel a lot of thanks for what they've been doing in the last several weeks. Now, I want to call your attention to Hillsdale College. They've got a great podcast network you can find on your favorite podcast app where you can actually hear some of the great history of the Middle East and Israel. They've got some great conversations about it, as well as American constitutionalism, citizenship, things like that. They've also got great courses. You can get it all for free at ericforhillsdale.com, ERICK, ericforhillsdale.com, or check out the podcast network in your favorite podcast app. Hillsdale will educate you. They're not into indoctrination. They're into just playing it straight education, the history of this country from a pro-America standpoint where they understand we are the last best hope for mankind. And they want you to be a part of it. They would love to have you participate. All you got to do is go to ericforhillsdale.com, ERICK, ericforhillsdale.com. You can find out about their podcast. You can find out about their courses that you can take for free on early American constitutionalism, on citizenship, so much more. And subscribe to them Primus. It is completely free. All of this is free. It's all available as part of Hillsdale's education mission, a mission they've had since the 1800s. Go to Eric, ERICK, ericforhillsdale.com today to find out more. All right, here in this fine short segment, I'm going to dive into something that makes some of my friends upset with me. But I actually feel very strongly about it. And there's an Atlantic story today. It's in the show notes if you subscribe. If you text DATA to 33777, the very first link is to the show notes. You can get a discounted subscription. The second link, by the way, to my book. You can order my book. The headline is Legalized Sports Gambling Was a Huge Mistake. A growing body of social science literature suggests that this is, in fact, quite different from betting with your friends. The rise of sports gambling has caused a wave of financial and familial misery, one that falls disproportionately on the most economically precarious households. 6 years into the experiment, the evidence is convincing. Legalized sports gambling was a huge mistake. Starting in 1992, sports betting was generally banned throughout most of the United States under the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. PASPA forbade running gambling schemes tied to competitive sports. Americans could still make bets with one another about Super Bowl results, but neither government nor business could get a cut of the action. That approach held until 2012 when New Jersey, fearing that Atlantic City was losing its competitive edge, legalized sports gambling. The NCAA brought suit alleging a violation of PASPA. The state responded that PASPA itself was an infringement on its sovereignty. The case went before the United States Supreme Court and in 2018 ruled that PASPA violated the 10th Amendment prohibition on the federal government exercising powers reserved for the states. With PASPA gone, states were eager to let sports books set up shop. Within a year and a half, Goldman Sachs estimated Americans were betting about $50 million a month. By late 2023, it's over $1 billion a month, a 20-fold increase. Because different states legalize sports gambling at different times, social scientists can compare different measures of well-being in states that did legalize with those that did not before and after legalization. Alarming patterns have started to emerge. Two recent working papers look at the economic impacts on legalization. One, by Northwestern University Scott Baker and colleagues, finds that legalized sports gambling depletes household savings. Specifically, for every dollar spent on betting, households put $2 less into investment accounts. States see big increases in the risk of overdrafting a bank account or maxing out credit cards. These effects are strongest among precarious households. A second paper from the economists Brett Hollenbach of UCLA and poet Larson and David Prospero of the University of Southern California tell a similar story. Looking specifically at online sports gambling, they find that legalization increases the risk that a household goes bankrupt by 30% and increases debt delinquency. These problems seem to concentrate among young men living in low-income counties, further evidence that most hurt by sports gambling are the least well off. A third paper from the University of Oregon economists Kayotaro Matsuzawa and Emily Arneson shows another, perhaps more surprising, harm of gambling legalization: domestic violence. Earlier research found that an NFL home team's upset loss causes a 10% increase in reported incidents of men being violent toward their partner. This report finds in states where sports betting is legal, the effect is even bigger. They estimate that legal sports betting leads to a roughly 9% increase in intimate partner violence. Because of the study's design, these results reveal what sports gambling causes, not merely what it correlates with. And the numbers they reveal are, of course, not only numbers, but human lives. Sports gambling is addictive, although many people can do just a little of it. Some keep playing compulsively, well past the point of no return. This yields not only debt and bankruptcy, but emotional instability and violence. The problems don't stop there. Gambling addiction has been connected to anxiety, depression, and even suicide. The industry claims it wants to prevent problem gambling, but it profits from the compulsion. Y'all know this is my soapbox. I feel strongly about this issue. Something's got to be done.